What's up YouTube? It's your computer engineering gamer, and Apple made a huge statement on April 5th for retro gamers for people that are in love with handheld systems. Emulators will be coming to the App Store in a verified means. What does this mean for everyone? That means no more scraping the internet for the download of the application and going through the back end of the settings to trust the developer, and so on and so forth. One of the cornerstones of the emulators that everyone knows about is the Delta Emulator. But what if everyone doesn't know about it? Where did it come from? Why is it such a big deal that it's on the App Store? It's a big deal for two reasons. One, the app has not just now, but ever since it's been developed, been the emulation option for Nintendo systems that did not require an iPhone to be jailbroken. And two, because you might not have heard of this app if you're new to emulation, but you might have heard of its predecessor. So to begin, let's jump into what the Delta Emulator actually is and some of its capabilities. The Delta Emulator is the most popular Nintendo emulation software that is capable of emulating games from the Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Nintendo Entertainment System, N64, DS, and Game Boy systems for Apple iOS products. This emulator is now available to download on the App Store, previously only available on the download site online or sideloading with the AltStore. More to come on that later. The emulator utilizes ROMs, read-only memory files, of the games of these available platforms to run the games on the simulated hardware, as long as Nintendo doesn't come down on it as they do with everything else that Nintendo fans love. The emulator is compatible with iOS devices and tvOS, the operating system for Apple TV. Delta has some special capabilities to have skins loaded onto it, operate with the external controls such as Bluetooth controllers or physical connection to the phone or TV. If you happen to not have an Apple TV but do not want to be confined to the smaller screen that fits in your hand, fret not, as the Delta Emulator now has support for AirPlay to cast your device from your hands to the big screen. Imagine showing this to someone in the early 2000s on their CRT. So now everyone knows this emulator is out and what it does, and that's cool and all, but where did it come from? Well, to find out where it came from, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, the far distant memory of 2011. During this time, the iPhone 4S had made its way onto the market. The iPhone was still relatively new, but it had made its name known to all mobile users. A young boy in his sophomore year of high school named Riley Testut is beginning his development career at this right time of the Apple iOS operating system. While he was working on an iPhone camera app to learn programming for mobile, his friend shows him what could be described as a miracle. Pokemon played on the iPhone. It was astonishing. It was incredible. It was kind of a weird process. You see, the iPhone had to be jailbroken to install the app on the phone. I've said that a couple times now, but what does that term jailbroken mean? Jailbreaking an iPhone means gaining unauthorized root access to the operating system by modifying the iOS. Jailbreaking the iPhone doesn't change its hardware or modify its features, but it does allow users to personalize the iPhone more, download unapproved apps, remove pre-installed software, and access third-party app stores. The biggest part of this is downloading unapproved apps, which leaves a security vulnerability for your iPhone. For many people, this is an uncomfortable thing to do as they are not aware of the security or safety features that may be influenced by jailbreaking their phones. For now, Riley sits and waits, content with his TI-84 running Pokemon Red. However, the next year rolls around and Riley is checking out for more projects to do to keep learning development as the new iPhone 5 has just hit the scene. While browsing around, Riley stumbles upon the GitHub project for GPS Phone, the same exact Game Boy Advance emulator that his friend used on his jailbroken iPhone. Riley approaches this project with a singular question: can I figure out how to run this emulator on an iPhone without jailbreaking it? Directly following this personal question, Riley is met with 999 plus compiler errors immediately upon compilation. It was daunting, it was insane, and it was entirely bonkers. But Riley was just crazy enough about Pokemon Emerald that he would do the impossible. And months later, Riley came out on top with a successful emulation of Pokemon Emerald on a non-jailbroken iPhone. And henceforth, Riley dubbed this app as GBA for iOS, the original app that would later become the father of the Delta Emulator. This success isn't where it takes off, however. Riley wasn't able to upload the app on his friends' iPhones without any distribution software. So his friends play it, and Riley uploads the project to GitHub, and there it sits while he and his friends can enjoy the emulator. However, the next year took a turn as the ability to distribute open source iOS apps with an enterprise certificate worked on iPhones. Riley became excited. He wanted a better app, he wanted a better experience, and he wanted everyone to have it. So after some time working with his friend Paul, the second revision, GBA for iOS 2.0, was released using this update, as well as some upgrades to the app. Not only did they write the app to be compatible with the enterprise certificate, they also completely rewrote the app from the ground up. In Riley's own words, not a single line of code was reused. This was done to address some issues with audio and ROM capability, so his app would run much smoother with more features like an in-app web browser for ROMs, using GBA ROMs, portrait and landscape support, controller skins, and even an in-game event system. After all of this work, the fruits of their labor sprouted. On February 19th of 2014, Riley released GBA for iOS publicly on its own website. They had succeeded. The app went completely viral with attention, and by March, the app had been featured in articles from Touch Arcade, Mac Rumors, CNET, and Time Magazine. With all the attention the app was getting, there were bound to be some wrenches thrown into the mix. Sometime in April or May of 2014, GBA for iOS was hit with a DMCA strike by none other than the big dogs themselves of the emulation legal department, Nintendo. This resulted in the project being flagged on GitHub, which also hosted the website, so they were both put on hold and unable to be accessed. The strike was given due to the fact that the app was pointed directly to a ROM downloading site. However, the notice did not strike the app for its emulation process. This is because the act of emulation is legal in the United States, and the act of emulation software is itself not inherently illegal. The illegal aspect that gives Nintendo the ability to send this strike is that playing ROMs while never owning the physical game cartridge itself is what is wrong, and that goes against the licensing policy of Nintendo. Riley made the fixes for the app browser, pointing to the ROM download site, as well as some other small fixes of copyright infringement, such as logos on the skins. Before Riley could even get the fixes complete and back online, another problem reared its ugly head. Twitter beef. Don't we all love and somehow full circle back to Twitter beef? Man, the age of social media is astounding. Riley found himself at the end of the pointer from LibRetro, a huge name in the emulation community behind the LibRetro API. Not only did they accuse Riley of ripping VBA MS emulation core, but they also accused Riley had partnered with CoolROM simply to make money and monetize the creation of GBA for iOS. Riley responded with the conversation he had with CoolROM showing his was not the case and received no response. Following this, the app went back online and Riley went to work on updates for the app, mostly to keep it up to date with iOS releases. But an even bigger update was in play for GBA, multiplayer. However, this would not come to be. As of October 20th on 2014, Apple released iOS 8.1, the killer of GBA for iOS. The reason this ended the app is simple. Originally, Apple revoked the certificate for the app. However, the date trick that allowed you to trick the app into installing it by setting the date back a day existed. This is what kept the app alive for 8 months. When iOS 8.1 came out, it fixed this exploit. With the certificate revoked to distribute the app and the date trick gone, there was officially no more ways to install the emulator, and the app would end its life cycle here. Riley did not blame Apple for his app dying, nor did he want any of his fans to. He acknowledged that the app was just existing on borrowed time. The app was still available somewhat on Bitbucket and then eventually hit the Cydia store, where it would eventually work on jailbroken devices. Back to what was avoided in the first place. Riley still decided to maintain the app and implemented a beta version of multiplayer, but the 3-year stretch of GBA for iOS had finally come to an end. With the end of GBA for iOS and Riley beginning college studying computer science at the University of California, I mean, what else did you expect? Riley had become more busy. GBA for iOS was now a relic to never be back on the iPhone as it once was. So what was there to do? Nothing serious had come up in the way of non-jailbroken emulators, and it didn't seem like anyone was planning to after the fall of GBA for iOS. Riley one day saw an Apple announce their own programming language called Swift. As an already experienced iOS developer, Riley dove right in, and not only that, dove in with an idea even greater than GBA for iOS. What if there was an emulator, not only for the Game Boy, but for every retro Nintendo system available? Riley sat down, saw the name for the project appear, and without hesitation input the name, Delta. With Riley's busy schedule and college courses, Delta was slower building than his predecessor. As he labored in silence, he finally came out with a post revealing his idea in December of 2016. The Delta Emulator, the all-in-one Nintendo emulation system. Riley was holding a beta test on the Delta Emulator that would at the time emulate the Game Boy, Super Nintendo, and the N64. Delta went through many revisions of beta tests. Riley was determined to make the version 1.0 of Delta a success without the pressure of releasing the app just to release it in a broken state. If only game developers today would follow this logic, they might have the same success as Riley. A couple of the major new updates, besides the obvious, included external keyboard support and a new process to sync data between all devices to save progress. The sync happens automatically in the background when you save the game in the emulator by supporting Dropbox and Google Drive as a backend, since the iCloud would only service apps distributed through the AppStore. The app never made its way to release during this time, however, since Riley became bogged down by schoolwork and contracting for a software startup. From 2016 to 2018, Riley got through school and work until he finally saved up enough to go full-time, and after almost a full year, Riley made a bombshell of an announcement. Not only had Riley been working on developing Delta, but he also developed his own third-party alternative app store for iOS systems, AltStore. In Riley's own words, the AltStore is an alternative app store for non-jailbroken devices. The app does not rely on enterprise certificates, so it does not fall into the same rut that requires workarounds that GBA for iOS died in. Instead, The app allows a sign-in with the user's Apple ID and creates somewhat of a dummy developer account that makes the phone think you are installing apps you develop yourself. The setup is free and restricts the user to reinstall any AltStore apps every 7 days, and only a maximum of 3 apps can be downloaded. Still a much better option than paying $100 for a developer account. To complete this setup, a system of distribution for the AltStore was necessary. Since Apple did not allow the installation of AltStore from the free Apple ID system, a different means was developed. For that, the AltServer desktop application was made. The AltServer will be responsible for installing AltStore onto your device. Your device will then create a connection between the AltStore and the AltServer with this connection intact. The AltServer will use the same system that iTunes used, using Wi-Fi sync to install and refresh applications to your device on the AltStore. The AltStore launched fully on September 28th of 2019 with not only the Delta Emulator, but also Clip, a clipboard manager that can run in the background with an interesting audio hack to keep it running. Along with this announcement, the beta version of Delta came with a surprise of its own. The Delta Emulator was originally announced to support the Game Boy, Super Nintendo, and N64 consoles. Well, for the app's beta release, Riley decided to go even a step further for handheld enthusiasts. He added Nintendo DS support. This meant in a 3-year span with only a full year of development time, Riley was able to add all the required support to run the different systems in Delta, his own clipboard manager, and develop his own app store that not only he can use, but developers all over interested in developing for the iOS system. Riley's launch was a complete and utter success. By the time the AltStore and Delta were released for a year, there had been over 1 million people to download AltStore, and over 100 different apps were sideloaded onto people's devices. Other people took to this and the community went crazy. They added apps to the AltStore to run virtual machines and Linux terminals, often used in software development. A developer named Oatmeal Dome also added an app for GameCube and Wii games. Riley must have been just too busy getting the DS working on Delta, because another year later in 2022, the DS emulation was complete. The beta for DS emulation was originally built on Desmume, but Riley pivoted to Melon DS since the core was still actively receiving updates as well as supported multiplayer. And if you've learned anything from this entire history lesson, it's that Riley wants development and games to not only be supportive for everyone, but also share between each other. To improve upon the performance of the base core, Riley also enabled what is called just-in-time compilation, which allows adaptive and dynamic recompilation of the emulator to run more efficiently. This gave Delta the ability to increase the speedup of DS emulation from a max of 1.5x to 3x. The DS came with its own custom skins, as well as simulating the effects that some games had upon closing and opening the DS lid, the most popular of these being the closing sound of the new Super Mario Bros. Game. With this release, Riley began looking forward to his next developments for the app. What he did not know at the time is the decision Apple would make for the App Store that allows us to freely download the app today without the use of AltStore. So finally today, the app has made its way onto the App Store. It's funny enough because 4 years ago, amidst the beginning of Epic's lawsuit against Apple and the rule of monopolistic power of the App Store, Riley said himself that the App Store will be a major topic of discussion for the next year. How right he was, and for even a longer period of time. If you happen to be more than just an enthusiast of emulators and have an interest in iOS development with the Swift programming language, the code for Delta Emulator is available on GitHub, where Riley makes updates and takes submissions from contributors. The AltStore can also be used to develop your own apps and upload by going to altstore.io. If you would like to support Riley in a bigger way to help further with development of the app, you can subscribe to their Patreon, where they have access to their Discord and early beta access to Delta 2.0. Currently, Riley is working on iPad, macOS, and Sega Genesis support for further bridge the gap of the retro gaming consoles to our childhood and the present. That's all I have for you today. Once again, a huge shout out to Riley for being an amazing person and taking his childhood dream of playing Pokemon to his phone to the reality of today that allows all of us to do the same with many different titles and consoles. If you would like to hear more from Riley on the development of Delta, the AltStore, and the future of the apps, you can check out his interview with 9to5 Matt. I made this video using a lot of Riley's own posts on his blog as well, so check it out and give him a look on his socials as well. As someone who found this app and used it to play Pokemon and other Game Boy games in my teenage years, I, on behalf of everyone else watching this video, I'm sure, would like to give Riley a huge thanks. You truly touched many lives in a way that brought smiles, enjoyment, and happiness, and continue to do so. If you want to catch up on more of what I'm up to, then you can head over to my Twitch at twitch.tv/LogiMan8, where I mostly stream on the weekends, where you can find me playing anything ranging from shooters to fighters and RPGs. If you would like to support me further, then take a moment to subscribe. I also have a tip page at pally.gg/tip/LogiMan8, where I strictly have the goal of using the funds to upgrade my setup to make streams and videos better quality for you all. With that, our time here is at an end, and remember, a man is lost without the sauce, but that same man can get lost in the sauce. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.